Greetings from the Dark Continent, Conscious Caracal here, or Arends van Sail. And tonight we're tackling some very relevant and recent news regarding firearm ownership in South Africa. The news that broke recently is that self-defense will no longer be a valid reason to own a gun in South Africa under this newly revived draft law. Tonight, I speak to Marnus Kamfer, who is a firearms expert, lawyer, and the head of legal and risk at AfriForum Community Safety, about this absurd piece of ANC government legislation and also how AfriForum is fighting back. Welcome on the show, Marnus.
Hello, Arends. Thank you. Pleasure indeed.
All right, so maybe to start off, I think a lot of people have been reading about what the contents of this legislation is, but maybe let's start off with just the important things that you think people need to know in regards to this newly revived draft law.
Well, Arends, there's quite a few, but I think the most prominent, and I think the one that have the citizens most up in arms, will excuse the pun, is where they simply want to take away the reason of having a firearm or obtaining a firearm for self-defense purposes. That's two sections in the Act they want to remove, namely Section 13 and 14. Then there is quite a big influence on the hunters themselves. If I can use a topic that's very relevant, is that we can now have 200 rounds of ammunition according to the existing legislation. They want to make that 100 rounds, and you can apply to have more. But obviously, there's a whole process you need to go for and certain factors that you must allege. Now, the hunters will also know that we used to load, go and, what's a nice word for it, make your rounds as accurate as possible. Load development is the nice word. And for that, you had several machinery that costed a lot of money that was paid for over the years, and your rifles you have is accurate now because of that load development, and you can produce the ammunition for yourself as cheap as possible, because the ammunition that you buy in the shops are expensive. That's it. They want to take that away. You will not be able to do your own load development. You will not be able to make your own ammunition. And what makes it worse, there's also a proposed amendment where the minister will be able to say, I don't like this kind of ammunition, and then ban that ammunition. So ammunition might become quite of a problem if this legislation is published. The other problem is with the firearms, getting them in from overseas, getting ammunition in from overseas. The minister wants extra powers there as well, which will complicate matters somewhat once again to get the rifles and the weapons from overseas. And then maybe also one of the most prominent factors in this legislation is the ballistic sampling of the firearms. Now, the minister can at any time publish in the government gazette a notice that you, as the owner of a firearm, must go to the police and give in your firearm for ballistic sampling. And then they will take a sample of that and file it. When we hear filing with the CFR and the police, we cringe, because we know that's a terrible situation to find yourself in. If you want to sell the weapon, if you die and someone inherits it, it has to go for this ballistic sampling. If you buy a new firearm, ballistic sampling. And the worst part of it is, well, even if you renew the firearm license, you must go for ballistic sampling. And the worst part of it is you need to take your own ammunition for them to make this ballistic sampling. So that's some of the factors that we're quite perturbed about, and we simply cannot see this legislation go through. It's not in the citizens' interest of South Africa.
Now, yeah, those are very, very scary parts of this legislation. But there are two things that I also picked up. You had a very good conversation today on a panel discussion that was hosted by AfriForum. And two other things that stood out to me, and maybe you can tell me a bit more about this, is when you renew your firearm license, if I understood correctly, under this new legislation, you're going to have to send in your firearm for ballistics tests. And that firearm is then going to be in the custody of the police. and you don't know when you're going to get it back. You don't know. We've had cases in South Africa, as was mentioned today, where police have rented out some of these firearms that were in their custody. This was something that stood out to me. And then another thing that I also heard today that was spoken about is that the Minister of Police is just going to be able to introduce new regulations on firearms as he wishes. This act will enable him. Can you elaborate on those 2 points, please?
Yes, that's very true. I'm going to start with the last one. We're sitting with a police minister that is, simply put, a failed minister. And he's simply utilizing his position. He's on his hind feet, and he wants to attack now because he cannot defend himself anymore because, with all due respect, everyone knows he's useless. And he made that quite clear almost himself by his doings on national TV and national media. So he failed as a minister. And he went as far as to start a fight with his national commissioner, proper policeman, if I might say it, with 35 years experience that came through the ranks. Remember, Cele was also deployed as national commissioner some time ago, but he immediately gained the rank of general. He didn't know anything about police. Frankly, he still doesn't. And his post as commissioner was, well, he got fired and left under a dark cloud. So he's a narcissistic being. He loves his ego, and he needs to show now who's got the power, and what he wants needs to happen. And we've seen it in the past. We can think of the lockdown period with regards to the alcohol. He simply states, I do not drink. I do not see the use of alcohol. And now nobody may drink. And he pushes that directives and regulations to take away alcohol for everyone. And he's the one pushing this firearm legislation as well. He doesn't want the civilians in South Africa or the citizens of South Africa to have firearms. And he's now pushing for this. And in the legislation, as you mentioned, it makes provision for him to finish out regulations with regards to that main legislation, and that regulations become legislation as well, enforceable legislation. And simple things like he wants to tell people, security officers who wears firearms, how to wear it, where it should be put, how it should be transported, and that's not where it stops. That's why he wants this export-import powers. That's why he wants the power to decide which ammunition must be banned and which not, which firearms is banned and which is not. Another thing I failed to talk about, like I said, there's a lot of factors. It's about 140 pages of legislation that we went through. The semi-automatic rifles, the AR-15s, which is quite popular with South African people, the semi-automatic shotguns, is now labeled as restricted firearms. In other words, you cannot simply get the shotgun and the semi-automatic rifle as like you used to. You now need to give very specific reasons why you need this. You need a specific license. You cannot simply go ahead and say, I have this hunting license, occasional hunting license, or an occasional shooting license. Please give me an AR and a shotgun. That days are over. Even the security companies are going to suffer. They need to give very good reasons why they should be put in possession of this AR and the shotgun. And the factors they need to prove and the evidence they need to give is a lot. It's going to be an administrative nightmare.
Yeah, so pretty much what this means is that private security are going to take on people with semi-automatic or even automatic rifles using handguns at the most.
Yeah, the irony is, this was approximately 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. The Private Security Industry Regulatory Authority tried through the regulations in the CIRA Act to start stopping security companies from getting access to the semi-automatic rifles and stop getting access to the shotguns and so forth. Luckily, and we were involved there as well, that was stopped in its tracks. But now they went and they tried to do it again through this Amendment Act, and which is, interestingly enough, they're going to start a body if the act goes through, where the police services and the private security services will both serve on and make decisions and give each other reports on. So that's an interesting development of it.
Mm,
I'm
mm.
sorry, as you did ask a first question. I got so yes, I have a lot of frustration, just like the rest of the citizens of Africa, when I start talking about this. That first question of yours was?
In regards to handing in your firearm for a ballistics
Yes.
test when you renew your license.
Yes, that's very interesting. The probability of the police going to tell the people, listen, give in your firearm and I'll give it back to you in 4 months' time is highly improbable. What they'll need to establish, and they already are in the process of doing so, as if the legislation is going to be published within 2 days, is they're going to have you bring it in and there and then try to take the monster. Now, how that's going to happen, no one knows. But it will be interesting to see. But there's no clear-cut indication of how they will obtain these ballistics.
Mm. So, as I understand the history or the timeline of this type of legislation, this is not the first time that it's been tried, and I know you've mentioned it previously as well. Can you maybe tell us a bit more about attempts like this in the past to do this a similar type of regulation regarding firearm ownership for self-defense?
Yes, that's a good question. We were regulated by the Arms and Ammunition Act, 75 of 1969, if I'm not mistaken, until 2004, when the legislation came into operation as we know it now, namely the Firearms Control Act 60 of 2000. And in that legislation, if you compare it to the previous one, it's highly restrictive. It was much easier to get hold of a firearm with the old legislation, to sell it, to use it, the amount you could have on your name. They did not necessarily license the firearm, and so forth and so forth. I'm not going to go into the fine details there. But interestingly enough, our minister that we just spoke about is convinced that if you take away firearms, violent crimes will disappear with it as well. And the IRR released stats today, which was very interesting, that showed that since this new Firearm Control Act was published in 2004 and came into operation in 2004, the violent robbery of vehicles raised with 46.1%. The violent robbery of businesses, 522%. And the violent robbery at homes, 125%. Now, this robberies, it's coupled with violence. So sometimes weapons were used, sometimes not. And when you look at the international tendency, on the 15th of March 2020, there was a publication, Applied Mathematics and Computation. And what they gathered from that research is that stricter gun control, like the firearm legislation we have now and this draconic proposed legislation they want to publish, will marginally lessen the guns, but the violence will remain the same or even go higher, which is clear from our own history. The stats I just quoted from the IRR. It simply does not work. It's chaos. You can look at a country like Venezuela. In 2013, they had the same legislation taking away firearms and being busy disarming the people according to that act. In 2014, when they went to look at the success rate of it, less than 1% of illegal firearms was off the street. So the only people who gave in their firearms was the legal firearm owners, but the illegal firearms were still in the hands of the robbers, of the criminals. So it simply doesn't work. And
And
the
now
reason
Venezuela is one of the worst crime rates in the world.
you said it, it's exactly what it is. And the research simply shows, and it makes sense. What you want to do, especially in a country like South Africa, our borders are shut. If you want to look at the lockdown period again, when South Africa ran out of cigarettes, no problem. It came from the rest of Africa in very large parcels on the back of illegal immigrants, not being stopped. Now, if they can, with that ease, bring in cigarettes, for instance, how easy will it be to bring in weapons, illegal weapons, AK-47? It happens already. So to take away firearms out of the hands of legal gun owners, the illegal weapons in South Africa will always be there. And it's internationally proven that you want to put as much firearms as possible in legal possession of the citizen. Because the guy who's got the legal firearm is not the one who's going to commit a crime because he knows it's being regulated. The criminal of the firearm is the one you need to concern about.
Well, just as you said earlier, with cigarettes being, the sale of cigarettes being banned and people still getting cigarettes, murder is already illegal in South Africa, but murder is still committed. I mean, it's insane to me to think that if only we could make firearms harder to come by, then firearm-related crime or murders would decrease. Now, someone in the comments actually mentioned here, and I'll put it up again, Sideliner Opinion says more than 80% of murders are committed with knives, axes, and pangas. Can you maybe elaborate on in terms of what that is, how that is relevant to this type of debate surrounding firearms for the audience?
Now that's true, and Dr. Groenewald said the same thing this afternoon. It's official stats. When you look at the murder figures, it's not the firearm that's the main killer. And let's just stop there. The minister decides, and there's another organization in South Africa that simply states and say, yes, but if you remove the firearms, then everything is going to stop. Now, we have the stats. We already spoke about the research. That's simply not the case. If someone wants to kill someone else, wants to rob someone else, wants to hurt someone else, he or she will do it, whether firearm or not. And that is why we see these figures, and that person is quite right. Most murders are killed with sharp objects because they want to kill that person. They want to hurt that person. They're not going to wait for a firearm to do it. To state that the firearm is the reason why this many people is killed in South Africa is like stating a spoon makes you fat, or a pencil makes spelling mistakes, or a car drives drunk. It's simply ludicrous. You cannot blame the weapon or the pistol that you use. It's the person that uses it. We don't have a firearm problem. We have a moral fiber problem with regards to the people who uses it and to make themselves guilty of this criminal demeanor.
So, I mean, this is going to be a bit speculative, but you are definitely one of the experts in regards to this issue. What would you say if you were to speculate or climb into the minds of the ANC? What are the ANC trying to achieve with this legislation? I think we can very clearly say that it's not for our own good. So what are they trying to achieve?
And like I said earlier, and I think that is, I don't want to make myself guilty as a conspiracy theorist. But once again, if you look at the minister who drives this legislation, who wants it to happen, with all due respect, this guy has an ego problem and he wants to make a point. He wants to show if I say something, it's going to happen. And unfortunately, I believe Minister Cele is the biggest advocate for this firearm legislation, and he's the one who wants firearms out of the hands of citizens. He's so out of touch with reality. He doesn't even know who his senior personnel is at any given moment. And he's done that on the TV in the past. So he simply decides that he wants something and he runs with it. And that's why they call him the cowboy, and he even dresses the part. There might be a more sinister reason from the ANC side why they want to take it away. There has been talks about where our president at the stage, Ramaphosa, spoke to a community of farmers at the stage, and he stated to them, land appropriation is going to happen. This was several years ago. And after land appropriation happened, we're going to talk about your firearms. So it seems like a strategy that the ANC has been contemplating, but Minister Cele simply took all diplomacy from that, and he ran in all guns blazing once again. Excuse me.
Yeah. So if you are not allowed to own a firearm for self-defense, what is the government's argument? What reason is left to own a firearm then if it's not for self-defense?
Well, that's a good reason. And we can quickly talk about the amendments there. Section 12 of the existing legislation gives someone the opportunity, that's a person who lives on the same premises as the main holder of a firearm license, to get what they call an additional license. So that person can then be licensed for the same firearm, and there can be 2 or 3 licenses on that firearm. They changed that now. That license still exists, but it cannot be any person on the premises now. It needs to be a family member of the holder of the firearm license, and that person needs to be part of the household, not simply live on the premises. Now, who made use, or who's still making use of this additional license? Let's say there's 2 brothers who's still young and who purchased a hunting rifle to use from time to time. One of them gets an additional license, and he can go and hunt with it. And if he's finished his brother, they don't have to go together all of the time. That changed now, because this family member needs to be in the same household. A brother won't simply live with another brother in the same house. They will probably have different flats on a piece of property. So that's gone now. It needs to be a family member, and that family member needs to be part of the household. And if this family member moves away, or moves out of the household, the license immediately lapses, and they need to give it in at the police station. That's the case also now. Let's take the scenario of the 2 brothers again. If the one brother moves away, from the premises, the additional license lapse, and it needs to be given in at the nearest police station. Then after Section 12, it's Section 13 and 14 as it stands now. That is the self-defense sections. The proposed legislation wants these sections to fall away. So Section 12 will still exist, Section 13 and 14, which is the self-defense sections, will fall away. And then Section 15 will still continue to exist. And this is the occasional hunting or shooting license. Now, the Act as it stands made it quite easy to get one of these licenses, because you simply need to prove that you're an occasional hunter or shooter. Now they made it much more difficult. A person who applies for this kind of license need to have a premises on which sport shooting take place or hunting take place.
Is that so? The premises, would that be like a shooting range or a game farm?
Exactly. Unless, I don't think shooting cats in the local park will count as there's a probability. But you're right, that's exactly what it is. You have to have your own shooting range or your own game farm or another premises where shooting takes place, being it ducks or guinea fowls, whatever the case may be. Now that changed, like we said. If you, a person like me, I don't have a farm, I don't have a shooting range, but I hunt on a regular occasion. What do I need to do now to get one of these licenses? I need to go to the owner of such a premises and ask him to please give me a letter confirming that I will hunt and shoot there from time to time. So you actually need to know someone. If you don't know someone like that, you don't have someone who's going to give you a letter to the effect, you're not going to get this firearm. So it's simply ludicrous. I must say, your hunters that apply for the licenses under the Section 15 as it stands goes to as much as farm as possible and get permission letters from them just to make the application stronger. But it's not always possible when you're a new hunter. And the existing legislation gives that person some break and say, yeah, listen, it's fine. Just give us a few photos where you shot something in the past and where you like to go and what you know about the firearm. That changes now. You need to know someone and you need to give proof that that person is going to give you permission to hunt on his farm when you have the firearm. So that makes it a little more difficult, and you may have 4 licenses under this section. Then the second one that's going to remain in existence is the Section 16 license, which is your dedicated hunter or your dedicated sport shooter. Now, this is a little easier Excuse me if I talk about the past sentence when I talk about the existing legislation. I'm very wrong this, and I have to make it clear. The legislation as it stands now continue to exist until the proposed legislation is published. But there's a lot of battles that's going to take place before that's even remotely going to be possible. The Section 16 license, usually you had a instantiation that confirmed that you are part of them, and that made it easier to get a license. That will change if this proposed legislation is published. These instantiations now need to give a letter or an affidavit to confirm that yes, you are regularly you have been hunting these past few years. You have been a regular. You have been at the shooting competitions that they held. So in the last 24 months, they must prove that you, as the person who applies for the license, was present at the activities that you apply for, if it makes sense. And then after 2 years, so if you have been a dedicated hunter or a dedicated sport shooter for 2 years, only then will you qualify for the AR, the semi-automatic rifles, or the semi-automatic shotgun to be licensed under this section. But once again, you have to give a very lengthy motivation, and you need to touch on a lot of factors describing exactly why you need this firearm. They make it very difficult. Then the following section, sorry, what did you say?
No, I just want to read one of the joke questions here from the audience. One of the audience members asked, "May I hunt with a handgun?"
That's an excellent question. By the way, there is persons, you get a certain caliber, it's an extremely long revolver. I think it's 44 caliber, if I'm not mistaken. That the guys, they actually put a scope on that weapon and they hunt with it. So yes, sir, if you have the right one, you may. But please don't run around with your Granny's .38 special and start shooting the buffalo. Going to turn south. Then the next one that still exists is the Section 16A. That is for the PHs, the professional hunters. But yeah, the technical aspects you need to touch on here to actually qualify for this license is ludicrous. There's lots of requirements and motivations and proof you need to give almost every year to have this license. You can have 8 guns with it, but the problem and the hell you need to go through to prove that you still need that 8 guns is really, really difficult. Then Section 17 was for the private collectors. That's gone. Private ammunition collectors, private firearm collectors, that's the end.
Not even an antique weapon.
No longer possible. It's gone. They want to take that away. See, I do it again, speaking like it already happened. They want to take it away with this legislation, so it's simply not possible. And there's really, I spoke to a few persons the last week that have collections that amounts to almost R1 million. Now he simply can't have his private collection anymore. What now? What's going to happen with all that assets? Is it simply going to be taken? Are they going to compensate him? That's things we need to see. Because I'm going off topic now, but it remains a constitutional right that you can have your property and it may not be taken away arbitrarily from you by the government. And if they take away your license and you cannot be in possession thereof because of them, it's kind of expropriation of your property. But that arguments will be made. And then the last kind of license you can still have is, and that still exists as well, is the Section 20 business license. Now that is for the firearms for the security companies, for instance. Once again, for them to keep on using their semi-automatic rifles and their shotguns, lots of motivation, lots of admin. It's a nightmare. And remember, all of these licenses that remains in place is valid for 5 years, not 10 years anymore. The dedicated hunter, PH hunter, occasional hunter, all of them remain valid for 5 years, except the weapons of the firearm companies, for instance. They will remain valid for only 2 years. And then that, places like Fidelity Security, it's worth 4,500 firearms. And every 2 years to go and renew that, the poor guys, it will be an absolute nightmare. It's simply not possible to adhere to this legislation. It's ludicrous.
In that case, you just mentioned the Constitution and constitutional right. There was a comment by Minister Cele this week where he said that South Africans don't have a constitutional right to a firearm. What is your response to this?
Well, Minister Cele read something, or someone told him something, because that came from, I'm not going to go into the detail, but there was a huge fight. We spoke about that on the previous program with regard to these green licenses. And the green license must remain valid, and the interim order, and so forth. And then there was the fight about the white licenses that's going to expire, and it turned in the Constitutional Court. And Judge Vroeneman said in one of that cases that it is not a right to have a firearm in South Africa, but a privilege. Oh, he never should have said that. Now, Cele heard that somewhere, or read it somewhere, and they went as far. Remember, when you read the preamble of the existing act, one of the, I'm going to sum it up, but it states that the act is there to amplify the constitutional right to life and security and so forth. That's taken away in the preamble of the proposed legislation, and all that's stated in its place is you don't have a right in South Africa to bear a firearm, it's a privilege. So that's where it comes from. It's a dictum remark from a judge that they actually pulled through the preamble to this proposed legislation, and they actually removed the main reason for the act being that it's there to amplify your constitutional rights. It's there to help you be more safe. It's there to help you protect your family in the moment of need. It's there to help you to associate with whom you want, to hunt with whom you want. That's just simply taken away now, and this watered off preamble that states it's a privilege. It's ludicrous. Obviously, that will be tested as well.
Now, Marnus, in regards to your affiliation with AfriForum and the fight continuing, AfriForum has already done a lot to pretty much make noise regarding this, but there seems to be a lot of action already underway. What is currently happening from AfriForum's side to fight this proposed legislation?
Like I said earlier, since there was rumors about this legislation, we had people phoning us, actually getting emotional. We need to take a step or two back. In 2018, this is old news now. 2018, the National Commissioner said, hey, we do not have the capability or the resources or the manpower to protect the citizens of South Africa and their belongings. Sorry. That's simply how it went. And people got this fright, and it's as if they awoke from a Buddhist dream, and they started reorganizing themselves, and AfriForum gladly helped with this in the form of neighborhood watches or farm watches and so forth. They started looking closely at the safety and security at their home to make it as difficult as possible for a criminal to enter. They started thinking of scenarios. They went through the administrative hell of obtaining firearms and to practice with it regularly, to make the wife and the children have them practice with it as well, to make them comfortable with it. And just when everything is in place, because they know if something happens at home, the police and the security company and whoever is not going to come immediately. They are their own first responder, and they acted on that. They made provision for that. And the government, instead of telling them, well done, how can we support you? What does the government do? They give this piece of legislation that makes it very, very, very difficult for anyone to still have a firearm. The emotional telephone calls where a gentleman and a lady tell me, listen, I feel safe at night because of that firearm. We have the rules in place. We know what to do if a certain scenario happens. And now that's going to be taken away. And we need to tell them, listen, we're really going to fight this. And that was no lie. And that's why we've released this media statement stating, please, citizen members, non-members alike, we really want to fight this legislation until the end with everything and all resources at our disposal. And then we immediately gave our legal team the order and the instruction to start with the commentary on the legislation. And they briefed very good advocates that is really good. And they're busy drafting the commentary. And we start a website with a petition is not quite the right word. We want the people to join forces with us with regards to that petition. And it's not an ordinary petition where you put in your name and surname and telephone number. There's a little more meat. And there it is. Thank you very much. www.myfirearm.co.za.
Right. So just before you continue, Marnus, so for people listening that can't see the screen, the English website is www.myfirearm.co.za. In die Afrikaanse webtuiste, as jy in Afrikaans dit wil invul, is www.myvuurwapen.co.za.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Now, when the people go onto the website, they'll see there's questions like, what firearm do you have? Are you registered with another accredited institution, and so forth, and so forth. It's just for us to have that data to know which way to take the fight. To see how many people that signed the petition have a certain license or belongs to a certain accreditation. So that's very important. And I really want the people, if at all possible, to go on the website, sign the petition, put in a commentary, and we're going to send that to the relevant authorities web page and email as well. And together with our commentary, it will make a really, very strong stand. So please, if at all possible. Then we are preparing, believe it or not, for litigation. Should the commentary not work, should the steps we are going to take not work, we will not hesitate to take this to court. And Constitutional Court at that, to decide about the constitutionality of this, whether it can happen, and so forth. But in the meantime, there's a very large campaign running. Lots of exciting projects are going to happen. And I'm going to give a sneak peek. We are in consultation with various organizations. If one needs to take something positive out of this nightmare, it's that people actually have the same dream, and that is to stop this legislation in its tracks. The excellent conversations we have with other firearm organizations, doctors, professors, people with master's degree that phones us and tell us, I have this documentation, I have this research, please use it. It's very nice to see that solidarity between the people, and we want to further close in on that solidarity between the firearm community and the firearm organizations. But we'll give more information with regards to that project as it evolves. But watch this space.
Absolutely. Now, Marnus, also just in that regard, you mentioned that you are planning to work with many organizations. What are some of these organizations that AfriForum is already working with, and what's your stance towards working with as many organizations as possible?
Yeah, that's exactly what we want to do. And one of the organizations I must name is Safe Citizen. Jonathan Deal started with an idea, and he's doing very well with it. Gideon, all of that guys are really a pleasure to talk with, and they do not want the organizations, I like their idea of doing things. They don't want all organizations to report to each other. I want to do this now. Is it fine with you guys? I want to do this. Is it fine with you guys? That will never work. So they simply, all of the organizations must do the projects they wish to stop this thing in its tracks. But we make sure, and that's why the communication channels are so important, we make sure we're on the same page. We share intelligence with each other. We share our projects with each other, and we see how we can strengthen each other's projects and campaigns. And this really makes a big influence. Even the political parties are in conversation with us and with the other organizations, the DA, the Freedom Front, and so forth. And that makes for quite a big spirit.
Hmm.
And
Now,
that's why,
Marnus,
sorry,
finish that thought.
just want to say, and that's why it's so important. You do not have to choose a organization whose petition you're going to sign. Sign all of it. Sign as much as possible, or as many of it as possible. So all of these organizations have your voice behind them. AfriForum wants your voice. Safe Citizen wants your voice, and so forth and so forth. Freedom Front, DA, help them all. If if the citizens give us their voice and we can go to the government or to court and tell them, listen, we've got 400, 500,000 people that says no, and here's the proof. And other organizations got it as well. It makes for an excellent attack.
Right. Now, Marnus, you've already explained what people need to do, but maybe one more time, just very simply, people that want to fight this legislation, what do they need to do in regards to, it doesn't have to be give 10,000 Rand to this organization, anything like that. What's the small things that people can do that doesn't take a lot of time?
As it's as simply as going onto that website that we stated earlier, that www.myfirearm.co.za, in Afrikaans www.myvuurwapen.co.za. Just go on there, complete the fields, and say so. There's even a place for you to give some commentary. That's it. And we're really looking into exciting projects that we're going to launch. And if the citizens wishes, they can really get into that as well. We want to give people on the ground the opportunity to also make part out of this campaign. The days of looking there up in the stars where the campaign is flying and where only a certain amount of people are allowed to travel needs to stop, especially with regards to this campaign. We want everybody to feel that they're contributing and that they are fighting this very, very, very important one.
Well, thank you very much for those details, Marnus. Do you have any final thoughts in regards to this fight going forward and what the future holds and AfriForum's role in it?
It's going to be a tough, long one, but we know what's at stake, and this really is for all South Africans, that's law-abiding and that wants to see their family and themselves and their communities safe. Get in behind the fight. Once again, I made that promise, I'll make it again. AfriForum will use everything at its disposal to fight this thing until the very end. And we would really like the people to join.
Well, Marnus, thank you very much for your valuable time. Thank you for all these insights and also for chatting to us tonight and answering some of the questions from myself and from the audience. Then again, just remember or remind everyone listening, if you want to help in this fight, go to the website. It was on screen. I'll tell you again, myfirearm.co.za, and in Afrikaans, www.myvuurwapen.co.za. There's also, if you don't even want to type the website in, there's a link in the description of this video that you can click. It will take you to exactly the same place. And then also just share these types of conversations or these types of websites and content as far and wide. Send it to all your friends and family that have a stake in this issue. I mean, that's pretty much everyone. And specifically send it to your friends and family that have a firearm or that are thinking of applying for one. It really helps out a lot. Thank you very much for everyone that tuned in. Thank you for your excellent questions and comments. And also thank you very much for everyone that shared this episode and is getting the message out there, and everyone that's already signed all the petitions and have made their voice heard. So you can also help out the show by leaving a like, and if you like these types of conversations, you can also subscribe for more in the future. So thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and Marnus, I hope you also have a great week ahead and a nice weekend, and all the best in the fight ahead.
Thank you, Evan.
All right, good night, everyone, and God bless.